Community history encompasses the collective experiences, traditions, and values of a group of people. By sharing this history, we ensure that the unique cultural heritage of a community is preserved for future generations. It also allows individuals to connect with their roots, understand their identity, and appreciate the diversity and richness of their community's past. A very warm welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey, as always. I'm pleased that you have joined us. This week, my community is carried by a very familiar face, Rosemary Alleyne, who will take us through her childhood community.
I was really born in Pickwick Gap in Westbury Road, but my parents, I think, moved up to what we would call Goodland in the early 1960s. So that is where I first came to understand where I was living. So the street through which we lived was called, we called it 4th Avenue Goodland, but now there's a sign on it saying Thompson Gap. So that is where I grew up. The house is actually still there. And it was in that village that we would play. In those days, there was no TV. First of all, there was no TV, so all the children would come outside and we would play hopscotch and catcher and things like that in the neighborhood. There was an open space at the time in the early years when it was about 7, 8, 9, 10, we would use that as a pasture to go and play. And strange enough, we would find cut plates, what we used to call cut plate out there. But these were broken plates. I don't know if they came from the original, because all of that land would have been plantation land. It was Goodland Plantation that it was called, and those would be sugar lands. And we used to find these cut plates, these beautiful, like people had beautiful plates. They were used to be blue, white and blue mostly. But I guess these would have come from the well-to-do people's houses. And it's interesting that in my teenage years, I would think, or my early adult years, that I only came to understand that Goodland, where we live, was a plantation. And I heard that from my grandmother. She used to talk about a lot of the canes. And at that time when she was talking about how the area was changing, I never paid attention to it. But now, as an old woman, I can understand, and the area of study that I had, I can now appreciate and understand what she was talking about. But by the time I came along, that plantation house would have been gone. And yes, the plantation house would have been gone, but she used to tell me where it was. It used to be somewhere down Bridge Gap or something like that. But you know how it is with recollections and memory, so I don't know if her memory was correct. But that is where I grew up. These are some of the things that I saw growing up and heard when I was growing up. Interestingly enough, I saw one of my childhood friends a few weeks ago. Her name is Marcia Taylor. And she and I used to play together. Then they had the Lamentines, who used to live not far from our house. And my friend, the child there that I used to play with was called Margaret Lamentine. She's now Margaret Chase. Her son now plays cricket for the West Indies, Roston Chase. So yes, we are still friends to this day. And I guess it was because not only we lived in the same area, but we were Catholic. So we used to go to the Catholic Church on Black Rock. And now we are talking about the Catholic Church. In those days, all the priests were white. And I remember in particular, this priest called Father Malachi Clune. I think he was Irish or Scottish or something like that. But he was the priest that I remember at the church. And at that time, we had to learn the liturgy in Latin. We used to go and sing this liturgy, which meant nothing to us. Even the choir, the adults, used to go and listen to, go to church and hear the service and the liturgy in Latin. That was something else. But that quickly changed, I guess, in the late 60s, early 70s, when other priests came. then the service would have been in English. But yes, the Catholic Church, that was by the way, because I was talking about my childhood friends, Margaret Lamontine and Marcia Taylor, and there was another girl who used to live just because in the area was the Liberty Social Center, and there was another friend who used to live not far from us called Herminia Holder. She was a friend of mine. We went to Westbury School together. I remember her. We used to go to lessons together. And an interesting story is that my mother, when we were about to sit the 11 plus, you call at that time they used to call it the 11 plus. It was the screaming test. My parents used to send me to lessons to a man called Harold Wharton. His place was in Passage Road. And some evenings, Herminia and I, instead of going to the lessons that our parents were paying for, we used to go and play in the St. Leonard's churchyard. And I only told my mother that was about 40 years after that. Instead of going to lessons, we used to go in the St. Leonard's church yard to play until the lessons time will come up that you got to go home, and then we will walk and go home. But yes, those are some of the people I remember. And there was another girl who lived not far from our house too, but I think she was older than us. Her name was Marcel Hope, and yes, she was a friend of mine. Then there was Heather Blackett, who used to live in Gravesland, just a stone's throw away, and her younger sister Sandra Blackett. So these were my friends around the neighborhood. I didn't mention the boys at all. I only mentioned the girls. The boys would be Adrian Ramsey, Arlie Ramsey. Wayne Narville didn't used to live very far from us, and Ricardo Hope. These would be the boys that would be flying kites. But I was never interested in kite flying. But those boys, yes, I know about them making kites and coming and getting the mother flower and making a paste and wasting out the flour, I would say, and using the paste as glue. Yes, but that was not a time where the boys used to go and put out a kite and left it out for 5 and 6 days. No, you put up your kite and you play with it a little bit and you take it down at night. Or then you would hear the kite pop and everybody say, wait, it gone down, Brandon, and all the boys would run and gone down looking at the kite going in the I don't know where they're going, because by the time they get down by the beach, the kite all out in the sea. But that was the thing, when the kite popped, as they would say, everybody looking at the kite and gone down, Brandon, running behind the kite. But yeah, kite flying was important. Now for school, we started primary school at Eagle Hall Primary, which is just down the road from our house. And in those days, I think you left school, we left at 7 or 8, because you didn't have that 3rd and 4th farm classes, so we would have gone off to Westbury. But in my primary years at Eagle Hall, our headmistress was Peter Wickham's aunt. She was our headmistress, yes. And what I remember about her, she was always well dressed. I mean, perfectly dressed. Always well dressed. That's what I remember about her. Teachers at that time, as I said, really cared. There was a teacher called Miss Babb, and I think she is Dr. Annalie Babb's mother. Miss Babb, she did not have children at the time, so in the summer vacation, she lived at down on the West Coast, and in the summer vacation, Miss Babb used to take me. She and her husband was Victor. And she used to take me with her to spend my summer holidays with her. And you know, it's interesting that my mother allowed these women, because it was Miss Richards, I would go over to her house, and Miss Babb, I used to spend, I don't know how long the summer vacations were, but I used to spend my summer vacations at Miss Babb. Yes, I remember Miss Babb. Yes, I can't forget her. Oh, when I used to go by Miss Babb for summer holidays, we would just go to the beach, because the beach was behind her house. There was no royal pavilion behind there. It was just the trees and the beach. She would take me to the beach, and there would be a lot of books that I would read, and we would go maybe shopping at the shop or something. But mostly I remember when I go to Miss Babb, it would be the beach. And I guess she didn't have any children, so I was then a daughter before she really had daughters. And one of my childhood friends who we grew apart because you know your lives change and all that was Cleverston Haynes, the former governor of the central bank. I think he lived in Grisette's at the time. So as small children, I don't know if my mother knew his mother, but he would come to our house and the two of us would hold hands. She would tell us, y'all go down to school now, and the two of us would hold hands and walk down to Eagle Hall Primary. So that was life in Eagle Hall Primary. And in those days too, you know, they talk about people selling out around the school. In those days, there were only old women selling around the schools. So they had this lady that used to live at the top of the gap by Eagle Hall. Her name was Miss Messiah. And she used to make something called, she used to make, by that time, a few people had refrigerators. So she used to make something called ice cream blocks and something called Mary, which would be a sugar cake, but it would be soft instead of hard. And she would put it in a piece of brown paper. Whenever we go on mornings, it used to be warm. So when we eat that sweet in the morning or in the evening when we were coming back, we would have that. That was at Eagle Hall Primary. Now when we went to Westbury, it was a different matter. There were several people selling around the school, but the principal person was a lady called Dolly. She was a brown-skinned woman, and she would sell whatever fruit was seasonal at that time. You would get ripe and green golden apples, but she would sprinkle them with salt and different types of candy. So Dolly was our go-to person at the Westbury School for snacks. And in that time, when I was at Westbury, the school meals program was introduced. Yes, that and in those days, I think that the Westbury School plant, where the meals were prepared, that was the principal area for cooking the food for the different schools across the island.
In March 1963, the school meals program started on a pilot basis with 1,600 children at 6 schools distributed in St. Michael, Christchurch, and St. Lucie. They were served a midday meal costing 10 cents and prepared at Westbury, St. Clement's, and St. Christopher Centers.
And my mother had a friend who worked there. Her name was Dorothy Mears. She was the supervisor. And boy, those women that worked in the school meals at that time could cook. We used to get, like for Independence, we would get pillau and rice, and we used to get a drink which would be marby. We used to get a fruit too with our lunch. It would be a banana, I could remember. I understand you used to get jello at that time. At Christmas time, you would get green peas and rice and pork and beef stew. And then at other times, you would get pork, beef and lamb stew with cream potato. You would get shepherd's pie, minced beef and potato. You would get a warm, because they used to bake, they used to bake to me every day, and you would get a warm coconut bread with lots of raisins. And so, oh man, and Mrs. Mears, who was my mother's good friend, and she lived in the area too, knew that I like to eat. I still do, sadly. And you used to have a metal tray with different parts that they would put out your food in. So when you would line up and you go up and you push your tray down, and it used to be 1 scoop of whatever, if it's 1 scoop of rice, 1 scoop. So when I come and Mrs. Mears was there, and I come down with my tray, and the lady would put in my 1 scoop. She would say, no, give her 2 scoops. She like a lot of eating. So I mean, Mrs. Mears remained my mother's friend. I think they were friends for more than 60 years until her death. The two of them died in the same week then. They were very good friends. So that is what I remember about my days at Westbury. Now at secondary school at Richmond, as it was called back then, I can say had very good days. We had very good teachers who understood that the world was going to be changing, and we, the girls, were truly prepared for the world of work and for life, because we were taught everything from needlework to cooking, I mean, they didn't only stress the academics, they also stressed skills for life. I remember Marie Emptage. There was a lady who used to teach us Spanish. I can't remember her name now. I remember Undine Whitaker. Undine Whitaker taught me at St. Leonard's. Yes, and she was the one who exposed me to celebrating your blackness, your African heritage. And I'm talking, this is way, way, way back. Undine was one of our teachers. I had a teacher called Miss Brathwaite who used to teach mathematics, and I didn't stay very long with her because I am terrible at maths. But then we had Carmelita Archer, who died recently, and she was my history teacher, and she really engendered and fostered in me this love for all things historical. So that's why throughout all of my working life and my life of study that I chose to do history and history related subjects.
Times were even harder. You see, blacks couldn't vote. They'd have to be earning more than £200 a year or hold prominent positions like being a doctor or a lawyer.
Many of us have benefited from her research in the field of history and heritage. Now, a well-anticipated feature of community life in those days was entertainment, especially at a time when our people were not as programmed as they are now to make use of the television set and the social media. What was entertainment for adults in those days?
For the adults, entertainment was all those dances in the Liberty Social Center, which was actually in the back of our house. And in those days, they used to have dances every night, from Sunday to Sunday, every night. But as a child, even to today, I have never been inside the Liberty. I don't know what it looks like because our parents never encouraged us. Further that, when 6 o'clock on evenings, you had to be in the house. So when the dances are going on all 11, 12, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, we would just listen to the music. It's only the music that we hear, but we could not venture near there. There was the house in the back of the Liberty where my friend Marcia Taylor lived. Her mother, I think, used to sell out at the back when they have the dances. I think her mother used to sell at night out there. But you can smell all the pork stew and you can smell all the food that they would be cooking for the dances. And I knew all the music because you could lie down and hear the music playing. And now, today, when people complain about noise, I often wonder about that, because I guess some people don't like noise, but I guess because I lived with noise, so much noise for 7 days a week, the noise of music doesn't bother me too much. But what I would say is, what I don't like today, if I'm at home, I don't want to hear what you're playing or listening to in your house. I don't like that. And I guess that comes with age and you want quiet and so on. But the Liberty Man was the place to be. They used to got all these posters, and one I remember in particular, all these ads, that P.I.G. the cat would be having a dance. So all the people that having these dances will have these handles. But the one that stuck out for me was P.I.G. the cat, who would be having a dance on the 30th of June at the Liberty Bar Solid, and they talk about a hi-fi and all that. But yes, the Liberty living out there was, and opposite the Liberty, there was a lady called Agatha Maloney, Miss Maloney, and she was a dancer. Boy, how she could dance. And outside of the Liberty too, I forget to tell you that the land ship was very integral to bank holiday activity in where we live, because we would hear. You could hear, because the land ship, like it used to be in Rotten Town. I don't know if you might be too young to know Rotten Town.
This series, My Community, is a celebration of our oral tradition, the importance of which is borne out in the manner in which Rose learned of the name that was given to a community in close proximity to hers.
Rotten Town is now called Lower Richmond Gap. It's out behind the cemetery somewhere out there. But when I was a child, it was known as Rotten Town. And I asked my mother one day, when I was a little girl, why they call this place Rotten Town? And she said to me it was called Rotten Town because a lady from the area went before a magistrate for cursing. And when the magistrate read what she said, he said anybody using these words can only come from a place called Rotten Town. And that is how that area got its name. I don't know how true that is, but that is what my mother told me.
Earlier in the program, Rose introduced the landship that was docked close by. What about entertainment as provided by the same landship?
On bank holidays, it was the landship. When you hear the drums coming up from Rotten Town, because there was a ship down there. Because you know, landships were all over the island in different communities. So we had our ship in Rotten Town. And you could hear on bank holidays all this time, so you hear the drums start beating. And Miss Maloney and everybody running out and shaking the hips to the music of the landship, and the guy playing the flute. That was our entertainment, the children's entertainment and the village entertainment on bank holidays. And certain times they would come out and the landship, yeah, everybody knew the landship, and we thought at that time that it was just funny. It was just something to be ridiculed or laughed at. But no, with time, we know different. Also, a feature of living in 4th Avenue, Goodland, was the spiritual Baptist. Because there was a spiritual Baptist in Rotten Town, a church, and it's still there today. And I remember the people in the village used to say, oh, the tie heads coming up. And that would be like around Easter time when they do the procession. We used to call them, oh, the tie heads, and they just sort of dismiss these people. But now we know that they're called Shouter Baptists in Trinidad, and we now call them spiritual Baptists in Barbados. But yes, the landship and the spiritual Baptists were an integral part of community activities down there.
And they are both celebrated in Barbados today. In fact, plans are well underway for the nomination of the Barbados Landship for the inscription to the UNESCO 2003 Convention list of cultural artifacts to be preserved and safeguarded. Now, speaking of culture, the Roman Catholic Church in this area provided the space for a number of community members to engage in many cultural activities and to be educated on many issues of the day. Those events took place in the Black Rock Cultural Center.
When Monsignor Blackett, then Father Harcourt, became the priest at Church of Our Lady, it was then that the young people understood and were made to appreciate Barbadian culture and heritage. Father Harcourt used to got all sorts of things happening in the culture. It was really and truly a cultural center. I could remember the current Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonzalez, coming there and giving talks on different things. I'm not sure if he was obviously not Prime Minister then. He was a lecturer at the university. And he used to come and give talks, I guess, about political things. And my mother was very involved in it because several years after my mother died, I had seen Dr. Gonzalez and Father Harcourt. And Father Harcourt said, you remember Caramel? He started describing her. And he said, yes. I said, you remember Caramel? The ladies used to do the ginger beer and the different things for the church? Right. But the Catholic, the cultural center was really and truly a cultural center, and it was a place that the young people in the community could go and get involved in wholesome activities. So it was really a hub there. It used to have a program called K & Co. I never went to it, but it was for Catholic youth, and my sisters used to go to that. And it used to be like in the summertime, and they would have camps and they would sleep over and things like that. But yes, the cultural center, I would like to see it revived and doing some work for the young people that live in the community. You don't necessarily have to be a Catholic, but be interested in doing something worthwhile.
The very good work of the Black Rock Cultural Center continues today. Now, As you are aware, if you need to shop for groceries or household supplies in an atmosphere where you will find friendly staff and very good prices, you visit the People's Market in Through the Bridge. In Rose's days, people made use of the shops in her community and nearby communities.
They had a few shops in there. They had Map Shop, they had Mr. Graves Shop. They had a good, you know, at that time village shops were the thing. But my mother would only send us like to Map, I can't remember buying anything from Map Shop, but Mr. Arthur's shop, which would be the same place now where the new police station on Black Rock is. There was a shop there, Arthur's shop. We would go in there and buy, like I remember they used to sell butter, but you had to carry, they used to put it in a paper, a greaseproof paper. You want lard, mostly lard, or the when you want bleach, what they call bleach now, we would carry a bottle and say, you want a little EC in this bottle. Then there was Mr. Brown's, the doctor shop, which we call the Eagle Hall Pharmacy, which we would say now Eagle Hall Pharmacy, which is politically correct, but no, the old people used to call it the doctor shop. So when you got a cold, you would go there and get Senegal of ammonia, a little bottle for $3, but now one of these bottles cost almost $20, so the old things coming back. Fenzik was the most thing you would get. Camphorated oil, these things that people would use. But interestingly enough, my grandmother, she, when we got sick with the flu or cold or anything like that, she would go and find oil leaves. I don't know if you know these oil leaves. People know these oil leaves that you see growing all. I don't know what to call them other than oil leaves. But she would go and bring them and stuff them in a pillowcase and put them in our nightgowns. Or if she had a headache, the only thing these old people used is, my grandmother used to take the Fenzik nor nothing like that. She would go and pick some oil leaves, and she always had her head tied up with these oil leaves because you could see them coming out through her head tie. And that is what she would use for the doctor shop. There was a doctor across there from the Catholic Church on Black Rock. I can't remember his name. He had left and went to Australia to live. I can't remember what you call him now. But we then, in the later years, my mother started taking us Ashby. Dr. Ashby was his name. And we would go, my mother would take us to him. He was very blunt in his diagnosis of what you had and so on. Because I remember I used to have tonsillitis really bad as a child. And the last time she took me to Dr. Ashby, he said this child got to get her tonsils out because this is too much infection she always getting all the time. When he told my mother that, I never had tonsillitis again. And I still got my tonsils, and this is must be about 40 years, more than 40 years. But I never had tonsillitis since then. From the time he told her about that, tonsillitis went forever. But yeah, that was one of the people I remember, you know, in the community, Dr. Ashby. But like I said, in the 70s, he and his family migrated to Australia.
Thank you very much, Rose. Now, sharing community history creates a shared narrative and a collective memory that can unite individuals and promote a sense of pride and solidarity, as seen in Rose's presentation. Learning about the struggles, achievements, and contributions of past generations can inspire present-day community members to work together for a better future. This has been My Community, as presented by Rosemary, Alleyne. I'm Sherwood McCaskey, as we always say here, do take good care of yourself and look out for the interests of your neighbors.